There's always a possibility that you will end up in a limited agency situation where you are representing a buyer and a seller, or buyer and seller, that are both connected with prime real estate experts, either where you're representing both sides of the transaction, both the buyer and the seller, or in a situation where you may be representing a buyer who is choosing to put an offer on a property that is listed by another agent in prime real estate experts. Therefore, that limited agency is at the brokerage level. In order to make sure that you are professionally prepared and are adequately covered, and that your clients fully understand the nature of this limited agency setting, as well as making sure that the paperwork is correct, we're going to go over the forms that are necessary to have in both files in a limited agency situation. If you represent both buyer and seller in a limited agency agreement setting, then you need to make sure that all of these forms are in both files, both buyer and seller. If you represent buyer, then you need to make sure the seller agent has it. And of course, the seller agent needs to make sure the buyer agent has it. We're going to start with the limited agency consent agreement that you see on the screen here. This is required by both parties to be signed as part of the offer process. This is to be signed by both parties so they understand that you'll either be representing both parties or someone else in the brokerage is representing an individual, the other side of the transaction. Buyer name and seller name must be filled out. If you represent both sides, then you need to make sure that your name shows as agent representing buyer and seller, Prime Real Estate Real Experts LLC, the company, and then the address being referred to. If you represent buyer and another agent in our brokerage represents seller, then obviously seller name and agent name need to be filled out here. Then they need to understand the roles of the principal or principal broker, that this relationship exists at a brokerage level. For your protection, I always introduce this to my clients as, in a situation where a limited agency like this exists, particularly where you represent buyer and another one individual in the brokerage represents the seller, then each agent is assigned to a specific broker to answer broker level questions as they go through the process. So, for example, if you and I have a working relationship, I represent you, or I help you as the buyer agent, seller agent would work with Marty or with Craig. That way, they can still have interaction with the broker, but that broker is only part of their side of the conversation. It helps maintain that neutrality. Then in the event that both parties need to have a conversation and feel like they want their agent there and the agent needs a broker there, we can still be there to help maintain that level of neutrality. Of course, they need to understand that you have a responsibility in representing them of maintaining neutrality, especially if you represent buyer and seller. This can be very difficult as you then begin to find out aspects from both sides of the relationship that you are to remain neutral. However, you do still have a responsibility of honesty to both parties. If it becomes apparent that one party cannot perform, you still have a fiduciary responsibility of confidentiality, but you do have a responsibility of honesty to the other parties. So maintaining that level of communication. Earnest money deposits, making sure that they understand that earnest money deposit is still held. We prefer at the brokerage so that it's in the event of any kind of concern over the earnest money that's taken care of. Now, what the parties are agreeing to is, if it is one agent, they consent to you as the agent and the principal or branch broker representing both the buyer and the seller, or two agents, seller's agents and buyer agent, with the limited agency at the brokerage level. This must be accepted by the buyer and the seller as part of the contract, and it is a reminder that this is a legally binding agreement. This must be presented for your safety and sake at the beginning of the process. Protect yourself. Make sure that your buyer and seller both understand that this relationship is going to exist. In the folder or in your file, then, you should have a copy of the exclusive buyer broker agency agreement and have already had that conversation with the duties of a buyer's agent and the duties of a limited agent. And on the listing side, the exclusive right to sell with that same information in paragraph 5, again, duties of a seller's agent and duties of a limited agent, so that all of those are in place. If you represent both parties, then you're responsible for making sure that the REPSI and any addenda are in both files. You're representing two sides. If you represent buyer and another agent represents seller, both are responsible for making sure that their files are complete with all the REPSI, addenda, disclosures, and any other forms. If you, again, I'll say this again as a reminder, if you need advice or are seeking help at a brokerage level, we assign a broker to each of the agents so that you can have that support as you go through the process. But these must be in there, and all of the regular forms must be in each file, so that when we go through and review the file upon completion, everything is complete. If you're missing any of these, then your file will be held up. Most especially, we're going to be looking at the date on when this limited agency consent was signed, that it was signed at the time of the acceptance of the offer, so that both sides were aware that this relationship existed.